Answer him, the billionaire said, calmly. The room froze. The manager's smile cracked. The translator stared at the floor. A single dried date lay on the white tablecloth like a verdict no one could read. No one spoke until a pair of worn heels stepped forward. The waitress they had humiliated all night lifted her head. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. She answered in a dialect older than money, sharper than contracts. Across the table, the old man's cane stopped tapping. The powerful thought they were testing culture. They didn't realize they were being judged, and the person holding their fate was the one they never bothered to see. The rain in Manhattan didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. For Samara Mills, the relentless downpour pounding against the service entrance of the Obsidian Room was a fitting soundtrack to her life. The Obsidian Room wasn't just a restaurant. It was a fortress of ego located on the Upper East Side. It was the kind of place where a bottle of sparkling water cost more than Samara's weekly grocery budget, and the clientele treated the staff not like human beings, but like automated furniture. Samara adjusted her apron, wincing as the stiff fabric rubbed against a bruise on her hip, a souvenir from bumping into a prep table during the lunch rush. She was 24, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone twice her age. She had terrified blue eyes and hair. She kept pinned back so tight it gave her a headache, mostly because Robert Gables, the general manager, claimed he could see the rebellion in loose strands. Robert Gables. Even the thought of his name made the air in the kitchen feel thinner. Mills. The bark came from the swinging doors. Samara flinched, dropping the polishing cloth she was using on a wine glass. She snatched it up before it hit the floor, her heart hammering. Robert Gables stood in the doorway, looking like a man who had been inflated with self-importance until his skin was tight. He wore a suit that cost $4,000 and a sneer that came for free. He was a man who measured his worth by how small he could make others feel. "I am looking at a smudge," Gable said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He walked over to the station where Samara was polishing the crystal. He picked up a glass, held it up to the harsh fluorescent kitchen lights, and grimaced as if he were holding a dead rodent. A smudge Mills on a Riddell glass. I was just getting to that one. Mr. Gables, Samara stammered, keeping her eyes on his polished shoes. That was the rule. No eye contact unless spoken to. And even then, keep it brief. "You are a stain on this establishment," Gables hissed, leaning in close. He smelled of expensive cologne and stale coffee. "Do you know who is coming tonight? Do you have even the faintest idea, or is your brain too clouded with poverty and mediocrity to comprehend it?" Samara swallowed hard. The staff briefing said, "A VIP, sir." A VIP, Gables mocked, laughing without smiling. A VIP is a movie star or a senator. Tonight we are hosting Sheikh Karim Al-Fayed. He owns half the shipping lanes in the Pacific and enough oil to drown this entire city. He is looking to buy this building, this entire block. And if he sees a smudge on his glass, Mills, I won't just fire you. I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will call every manager from here to Jersey and tell them you steal silverware. It wasn't an empty threat. Gables had done it before. He had blacklisted a busboy named Timothy just last month for dropping a breadbasket. "It won't happen, sir," Samara whispered. "Get out of my sight." Gable snapped, dropping the glass back onto the tray with a dangerous clatter. "You are not to approach the Sheikh's table. You are not to breathe in his direction. You will handle water refills for the far corner station 4. If I see you near the royal table, you're done." Samara nodded and skirted away, clutching her tray. She retreated to the scullery, her sanctuary, where the noise of the dishwasher drowned out her thoughts. She needed this job. God, she needed it. Her life was a house of cards, held together by these shifts. Her father, a brilliant but broken man, was sitting in a care facility in Queens, his mind slowly eroding from early onset dementia. The private care cost a fortune. The debt collectors were calling her cell phone 5 times a day. She looked at her reflection in the stainless steel of the drying rack. "Just keep your head down," she told herself. "Be invisible. Be a ghost." But ghosts have a way of hearing things they shouldn't. As she prepped the water pitchers, she overheard Gables talking to Chef Gordon near the pass. "The translator is stuck in traffic on the bridge," Gables was saying, wiping sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "A jackknifed tractor trailer." "So," Chef Gordon grunted, plating a microscopic portion of foie gras. "The guy speaks English, doesn't he? They all went to Oxford or whatever. That's not the point," Gables hissed. "It's about protocol respect. He's travelling with his personal advisor. And his uncle. The uncle is old school. If we don't greet them properly, if we don't show we understand their culture, the deal for the building falls through. The owners will have my head. Just smile and nod, Robert." Gordon laughed. "Feed them the Wagyu. Everyone speaks the language of Wagyu." Gables didn't look convinced. He looked like a man standing on a trap door. "I have memorized the greeting. Assalamu alaikum. I practiced it all morning. It has to be perfect." Samara paused, her hand hovering over a lemon wedge. She felt a strange pang in her chest. Arabic. The sounds of the language were like a distant, dusty memory. Before the dementia, before the poverty, her father had been a structural engineer. They had lived in Amman, Jordan for 6 years when she was a child. She had gone to an international school, but her best friends were the local kids in the neighborhood. She had eaten mansaf with her hands, haggled in the souks for spices, and learned the lyrical, poetic flow of the language. She hadn't spoken it in 15 years. Not since they moved back to the States and everything fell apart. "Mills!" Gables shouted from across the kitchen. "Stop daydreaming! The motorcade is 2 minutes out." The energy in the obsidian room shifted instantly. It was no longer a restaurant. It was a theatre of war. Waiters lined up in a phalanx. The lighting was dimmed to a golden hue. The music was lowered to a barely audible hum. Samara was shoved into the shadows near the service station, holding a pitcher of water like a shield. Outside, the heavy thud of car doors slamming echoed. Then the front doors swung open. Robert Gables stepped forward, his smile so wide it looked painful. He bowed, perhaps a little too low. "Welcome," Gables said, his voice trembling slightly. "Welcome to the Obsidian Room." Entering the restaurant wasn't just a man, it was a force of nature. Sheikh Karim Al-Fayed was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in an immaculate dark suit. Though he wore the traditional gutra on his head, signaling he was here on official business but keeping it modern. Behind him walked 3 men. One was clearly security, a mountain of a man scanning the room for threats. One was a younger assistant in a suit typing furiously on a tablet, and the third was an older man, dressed in traditional robes, leaning heavily on a cane. He had a white beard and eyes that were sharp, judgmental, and incredibly weary. This was the uncle, the traditionalist. Gable stepped toward the sheikh. "We are honored," he said, and then clearing his throat, he butchered the language. "Assalamu alaikum." He pronounced it like he was ordering a deli sandwich. It was flat hard and utterly devoid of the soft guttural nuance required. The sheikh paused. He looked at Gables with a mixture of amusement and pity. The older uncle, however, frowned deeply and muttered something to the sheikh. Samara, standing 20 feet away in the shadows, felt a chill. She heard what the uncle said perfectly. "Al-Rajulah. This man does not respect us. He sees only money." Gables, oblivious, beamed. "Right this way, we have the Emperor's table prepared." As the procession moved past Samara, the sheikh's eyes briefly flicked to the side. He didn't look at the decor or the expensive art on the walls. He looked at the staff. He looked right at Samara. For a split second, their eyes locked. Samara instinctively looked down, remembering the rule. But in that second, she saw something unexpected in the billionaire's gaze. He looked bored. He looked tired of people pretending. He walked on, and Samara exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Don't screw this up." Gables hissed at the staff as he trailed behind the VIPs. "Whatever happens, nobody speaks unless spoken to. If there is a problem, you come to me. Do not engage." The night had begun, and the trap was set, but nobody knew who was actually going to fall into it. The first hour was a masterclass in tension. Clear as throat. The atmosphere in the obsidian room was brittle, like dried leaves ready to catch fire. Samara was assigned to Station 4, which was diagonally across from the VIP table, but far enough away that she was considered safe from causing damage. From her vantage point, she could see everything. She watched as Robert Gables hovered over the Sheikh's table like a nervous vulture. Every time the Sheikh lifted a finger, Gables was there offering wine, offering napkins, offering compliments that sounded rehearsed. The Sheikh Karim was polite but distant. He spoke perfect English with a slight British accent, likely from boarding school. But the older man, the uncle, Clear's throat, refused to speak English. He sat in silence, staring at the menu with disdain. The tension spiked when the appetizers arrived. The chef had prepared a special tasting menu: truffle scallops, foie gras torchon, and caviar blindness. The servers placed the plates down in perfect synchronization. "For you, Your Highness," Gables said, bowing to the older man. The uncle looked at the plate. He poked the foie gras with a fork, then pushed the plate away. He said something sharp in Arabic to Karim. Karim sighed and looked up at Gables. "My uncle asks, is this the best the city has to offer?" Gables turned pale. I assure you, sir, the foie gras is imported from France this morning. It is the finest. He does not care about the price." Karim interrupted softly. "He cares about the soul of the food. He feels this place is cold." Cold Gables looked around the warm, golden room. "I can turn up the heat, sir." Karim gave a small, sad smile. "That is not what he means." Samara, refilling a water glass for a rude couple at Station 4 who hadn't acknowledged her existence, listened intently. The uncle was speaking again. Aliafa al-Hakika. Where is the hospitality? Where is the truth? The uncle was testing them. Clear's throat. Samara realized it instantly. This wasn't about the food. It was about the character of the people serving it. In Bedouin culture, hospitality wasn't about luxury. It was about honor, generosity, and connection. Gables was offering luxury, but he was hoarding his humanity. He was fake. The dinner progressed from bad to worse. The uncle refused the main course. The expensive wine sat untouched. The younger assistant whispered to Gables that the building deal was looking unlikely. Gables was sweating profusely now. His perfectly gelled hair was starting to droop. He stormed back into the kitchen, nearly knocking Samara over as she came in with dirty dishes. "They hate it." Gables screamed at Chef Gordon. "They hate everything. The old man won't eat. He's grumbling in that language and looking at me like I'm an insect. Maybe he's just not hungry." Gordon yelled back, throwing a towel. "I cooked the lamb perfectly." "It's not the lamb. It's a test." Gables realized his eyes manic. "They are testing my patience. They want to see if I crack." He straightened his tie, a look of desperate determination on his face. "I will not crack. I will charm them into submission." Gables grabbed a bottle of vintage cognac worth $10,000 and marched back out. Samara followed, carrying a tray of espressos for her station. As she entered the dining room, the energy had shifted again. The music had stopped. The restaurant was silent. The sheikh had stood up. The uncle remained seated, his cane tapped rhythmically on the floor. Gables approached with the cognac. "Gentlemen, please, a gift from the house." "A rare—" The sheikh raised a hand, silencing him. "Mr. Gables," Karim said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "My uncle has a question, a final question. If you can answer it, we will sign the deal for the building tonight. We will buy this establishment and keep you on as director of operations with double your salary." Gables' eyes lit up with greed. "Anything. Ask me anything. I know the history of this city, the market trends, the culinary arts. It is not about the market," Karim said. He turned to his uncle. The old man looked up. His dark eyes bore into Gables. He didn't speak. He reached into his robe and pulled out a small, worn pouch. He opened it and placed a single dried object on the white tablecloth. It was a date, a simple, wrinkled brown date. Then the uncle spoke. His voice was raspy, filling the room. He, Clear's throat, didn't look at Karim to translate. He looked directly at Gables, waiting. Mada Tamik. He waited. Gables froze. He looked at the translator, the young assistant. But the sheikh shook his head. No, Karim said. The translator will not help you. You claim to respect our culture. You tried to greet us in our tongue. You run a global establishment. Answer him. Gables looked at the dried date. He looked at the sheikh. He looked around the room, panic rising in his throat like bile. The other diners were watching. The staff was frozen against the walls. Gables stammered. Is he asking about the date I can get fresh dates? Medjool dates. The biggest ones. The uncle's face remained stone. Is it a riddle? Gables laughed nervously, sweat dripping onto his collar. It sounds poetic. Something about gold. I heard dahab. That means gold, right? Gables pointed at the gold fixtures on the wall. We have gold. We have the best luxury. The sheikh's face hardened. Disappointment washed over him. You hear the word gold and you think of money, Karim said quietly. I don't understand. Gables snapped, his facade breaking. This is ridiculous. I am a manager, not a linguist. Speak English. We are in America. The outburst rang through the room. The insult hung in the air. The uncle began to rise, reaching for his cane. The deal was dead. The night was over. Samara stood at Station 4, her tray trembling in her hands. She knew the answer. She knew exactly what the old man had asked. It was a proverb she had heard a dozen times in the dusty living rooms of Ammon. If you have a palace of gold and a heart of stone, what do you possess? The answer wasn't just words, it was a philosophy. Clear as throat. She saw the uncle struggling to stand. She saw the defeat in the sheikh's eyes, and she saw Gables red-faced and angry, about to blame everyone else for his failure. Samara looked at the exit. She could just walk away. It wasn't her fight. She was the invisible waitress. But then she thought of her father. She thought of the hospitality he had taught her. She thought of the dignity that the old man was looking for and not finding. Without thinking, without a plan, and certainly without permission, Samara took a step forward. The sound of her heels on the park floor was the only sound in the room. Mr. Gables is wrong. Her voice rang out. It was shaking, but clear. Every head in the restaurant turned. Gables spun around, his eyes bulging. Mills, get back to your station. Get out. Samara ignored him. She didn't look at Gables. She looked past the billionaire sheikh straight at the old man in the robes. She took a breath, letting the guttural sounds form in the back of her throat, remembering the dusty streets and the warm tea. Latam Cheyenne, Samara said softly. You possess nothing. The silence that followed was absolute. The silence following Samara's words was heavy, but it was a different kind of heaviness than before. It wasn't the suffocating pressure of fear. It was the stunned vacuum of the impossible happening right in front of everyone's eyes. Robert Gables looked as if he had been slapped. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He stared at Samara, this invisible creature he had spent years tormenting, as if she had suddenly grown wings and breathed fire. What did you say? Gables finally sputtered, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He turned to the sheikh, laughing nervously. I apologize, Your Highness. This is a mental health issue. She is confused. I will have security remove her immediately. He lunged towards Samara, grabbing her arm with a grip that was tight enough to bruise. You are finished, he hissed in her ear. Get out before I call the police. Let her go, a voice boomed. It wasn't the sheikh, it was the uncle. The old man, who had seemed frail and withered only moments ago, slammed his cane onto the floor with surprising strength. He stared at Gables with eyes that burned with sudden intensity. Tutor, the uncle commanded. Leave her. Gables released Samara, instantly stumbling back as if burned. The uncle turned his gaze slowly toward Samara. He didn't look angry. He looked fascinated. He beckoned her closer with a crooked finger. Samara's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew she should run. She knew this was the end of her job, the end of the money for her father's care. But the old man's eyes, held her there. They reminded her of her father's eyes before the fog of dementia had stolen him away. Sharp, kind, and demanding of truth. She stepped forward, smoothing her stained apron. "You speak our tongue?" the uncle asked, this time in English, though his voice was thick and heavily accented. "A little Yazidi," Samara replied, using the respectful term for sir or master. "I lived in Amman when I was a child. My father, he loved the culture." The uncle nodded slowly. He reached out and picked up the dried date from the table. He held it up to the light. "The manager," the uncle said, pointing a shaking finger at Gables. "Thought I asked about gold. He thought I asked a riddle about money." The uncle turned his gaze back to Samara. "Translate my question for him. Tell him what I asked." Samara took a deep breath. She looked at Gables, who was sweating through his suit. He asked, "If you have a palace of gold and a heart of stone, what do you possess?" The room was silent. "And your answer?" the uncle pressed. "I said, 'You possess nothing,'" Samara whispered, "because wealth without compassion is just a gilded cage. It is the poorest way to live." The uncle closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. A smile, genuine and warm, broke through the hard lines of his face. He looked at his nephew, Sheikh Karim. "Karim," the uncle said softly, "she understands. She knows that hospitality is not about the foie gras or the crystal glass. It is about the soul." Karim looked at Samara with a mixture of shock and admiration. "My uncle has not smiled in 3 weeks," the billionaire admitted, his voice low. "We have traveled to London, Paris, and Tokyo. Everywhere we go, people offer us gold-expensive githolts and fake smiles. They want our money. They do not see us as people." Karim stood up. He was taller than he looked from a distance, looming over the table. He gestured to the empty chair next to him. "Please," Karim said, "sit with us." Gables let out a strangled noise. "Your Highness, this is highly irregular. She is a waitress. She is wearing a dirty apron. This is a 5-star establishment. We have codes of conduct." Mr. Gables Karim said, his voice dropping to absolute zero. "I am buying this building, am I not? If I buy it, I make the rules. And my rule is that this woman sits." Gables snapped his mouth shut. He looked around the dining room. Customers were whispering. Phones were out recording the scene. He was losing control. And for a narcissist like Gables, that was a fate worse than death. Samara hesitated. I can't, sir. I have tables to serve. Tonight you have only 1 table," the uncle said. "Sit." Samara sat. The sensation of sitting down in the obsidian room was foreign to Samara. For 3 years, she had only ever stood, walked, or run within these walls. Feeling the velvet cushion of the chair beneath her felt illegal. Gables retreated to the kitchen, but he didn't leave. He stood by the swinging doors, watching through the small glass porthole, his eyes narrowed into slits of pure malice. He was on his phone, typing furiously. At the table, the dynamic had shifted completely. The waiters, confused and terrified, brought water for Samara. They placed a fresh napkin in her lap. "What is your name?" Sheikh Karim asked, ignoring the menu. "Samara. Samara Mills." "Tell me, Samara," the uncle said, leaning forward. "How does an American girl know the proverb of the stone heart?" Samara looked down at her hands. They were red and chapped from the industrial soap used in the kitchen. "My father," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "His name is Thomas. He was a structural engineer. 10 years ago, he was hired to help design a water filtration system in Jordan near the Syrian border. We lived there for 6 years. A noble profession," Karim noted. "Water is life." He loved the people there. Samara continued, her eyes misting over. "He used to say that back home in New York, people walked past each other without looking. But in a man, if you sneezed, 3 strangers would bless you. He taught me the language because he didn't want me to be a tourist. He wanted me to be a neighbor." "And where is Thomas now?" the uncle asked gently. Samara's breath hitched. This was the part she never talked about. Not to her co-workers, not to Gables. He got sick. Early onset dementia. It started when we came back to the States. He lost his job then, the house, the medical bills. They ate everything. She looked up, meeting the Sheikh's gaze. He's in a facility in Queens now, a state home. It's not good. I work here, double shifts, trying to save enough to move him to a private place, a place where they will speak to him, not just drug him. The table fell silent. The tragic irony hung in the air. Samara was serving men who had billions while she scraped by to buy dignity for her dying father. You work for this man. The uncle gestured toward the kitchen door. For your father. I endure this man. For my father, Samara corrected. Karim looked at his uncle. A silent communication passed between them. The uncle nodded slightly. Samara Karim said formally, "We were looking for a sign. My company is not just buying real estate. We are looking to launch a cultural exchange initiative, a bridge between the East and West. We need people who understand the heart of both worlds. We don't need MBAs from Harvard. We need people who know what it means to serve." Samara's heart skipped a beat. "I don't understand. I'm offering you a job," Karim said. "Not as a waitress, as a cultural liaison for the Alpha Foundation. The starting salary is crash." The sound of shattering porcelain exploded from the kitchen entrance. Robert Gables burst through the doors, followed closely by two large men in dark uniforms, the building's private security. Gables wasn't cowering anymore. He was smiling. It was a cold, triumphant smile that didn't reach his eyes. He marched toward the table, his confidence restored. "I'm so sorry to interrupt this touching little scene," Gables announced, his voice booming so the entire restaurant could hear. "But I have a duty to protect my guests, even the ones who are too naive to see the snake in the grass." Karim frowned, standing up. "What is the meaning of this, Gables?" "The meaning, Your Highness," Gables sneered, pointing a finger at Samara, "is that you are dining with a thief." Samara stood up, her chair scraping the floor. "What? That's a lie." "Is it?" Gables turned to the security guards. "Gentlemen, I received a report from the staff locker room. Several high value items have gone missing from the safe in the last hour. A guest's diamond bracelet and $300 in cash." "I haven't been near the locker room," Samara cried out, panic rising in her chest. "I've been on the floor all night." "We'll see about that," Gables said smoothly. "Standard protocol. If you have nothing to hide, you won't mind if we check your apron right now." Samara froze. She knew she hadn't stolen anything, but she also saw the look in Gables' eyes. It was the look of a man who had already written the ending of the script. "Check her," Gables commanded. The restaurant was dead silent. The romantic lighting now felt like an interrogation spotlight. Samara stood by the table, surrounded by the opulence she could never afford, while two security guards stepped forward. "Mom, please raise your hands," one guard said. He wasn't rough, but he was firm. "This is outrageous," Karim barked. "I command you to stop." "I am afraid I can't do that, Your Highness," Gables said, feigning regret. "The law is the law. Theft on private property is a serious offense, even for your friends. If she is innocent, she has nothing to fear. But I cannot have a thief serving billion-dollar clients. It's a liability." Samara raised her trembling hands. She felt the tears hot and stinging in her eyes. He did this, she thought. He must have. The guard patted down her sides. He reached into the deep front pocket of her apron, the pocket where she kept her wine opener and pens. He frowned. He pulled his hand out. In his palm sat a gleaming diamond-encrusted tennis bracelet. A gasp rippled through the dining room. A woman at a nearby table covered her mouth. "Uh-huh." Gables clapped his hands together, acting shocked. "I knew it. The poor, struggling daughter act. It's always the quiet ones, isn't it? Stealing from the very patrons she claims to respect." Samara stared at the bracelet. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "No," she whispered. "No, I swear. I've never seen that before. He put it there. He must have put it there when he bumped me earlier. I haven't touched you all night, Mills." Gables lied smoothly. Don't make this worse by lying. We have witnesses. Chef Gordon saw you sneaking out of the coat check. It was a lie. Samara knew it. But Gordon was Gables's friend. He would back him up. It's a setup, Samara pleaded, turning to the sheikh. Please, you have to believe me. I didn't take it. Karim looked at the bracelet, then at Samara. His face was unreadable. He was a businessman, a man of logic. The evidence was right there. This is a police matter, Gables said, pulling out his phone. I'm calling the NYPD. I want her arrested and charged and, obviously... He looked at Samara with a sneer. You are fired. Effective immediately. Get your things and get out of my sight before the cops get here. I'll have them pick you up from the alley. Wait, the uncle said. Gables rolled his eyes. With all due respect, sir, the evidence is physical. There is no riddle that solves this. Let me see the bracelet, the uncle demanded. The guard hesitated, then handed the jewelry to the old man. The uncle inspected it closely. He turned it over in his hands. This is a very expensive piece, the uncle muttered. Cartier vintage. Exactly, Gable said. She has expensive taste. Who does it belong to? Karim asked sharply. Who reported it missing? Hey, a lady in the private dining room? Gables said quickly. Mrs. Vanderhoven, she's a regular. Samara felt the walls closing in. Mrs. Vanderhoven was real. She was a wealthy, mean-spirited woman who often dined there. If Gables had convinced her to play along, or if he had stolen it from her to frame Samara, there was no way out. I didn't do it. Samara sobbed, her dignity finally cracking. Please, my father, if I get arrested, he'll be thrown out of the home. I can't lose this job like this. You should have thought of that before you became a criminal. Gable spat. Get her out. Escort her to the back. The guards grabbed Samara's arms. This time Karim didn't stop them. He stood still, his jaw clenched tight, watching the scene unfold. He seemed paralyzed by the presence of the physical evidence. Move, the guard ordered. Samara was dragged away from the table. She looked back one last time. The sheikh was looking down at the tablecloth. The uncle was still holding the bracelet, staring at it with a furrowed brow. Gables adjusted his cufflinks, a victorious smirk playing on his lips. He had won. He had removed the threat, humiliated the upstart, and restored the natural order of his restaurant. Now, Gables said, turning his beaming face back to the billionaires as Samara was shoved through the kitchen doors. I apologize for the trash. It's so hard to find good help these days. Shall we discuss the contract? I have the papers in my office. The kitchen door swung shut, cutting off Samara's sobbing. Gables pulled out a chair and sat down, uninvited, confident that the deal was now his to command. But he hadn't noticed one small detail. The uncle was no longer looking at the bracelet. He was looking at the security camera dome in the corner of the ceiling. And then he looked at his nephew and tapped 3 times on the table. Karim's eyes snapped up. The paralysis was gone. A cold, predatory light entered his eyes. Yes, Mr. Gables, Karim, said his voice terrifyingly calm. Let us discuss the contract. But first, let us discuss the nature of a liar. Robert Gable sat in the chair opposite Sheikh Karim, his chest heaving with the adrenaline of his victory. He poured himself a glass of the sheikh's untouched wine, a presumptuous move that went unnoticed by the billionaire. A tragic affair. Gable sighed, swirling the deep red liquid, but necessary. One must weed out the rot to protect the garden. Now regarding the acquisition, clears throat, I assume the price we discussed is still on the table with the added clause for my retention bonus. Sheikh Karim didn't answer immediately. He picked up his linen napkin and slowly, methodically, clears throat, folded it into a perfect square. The silence stretched until it became a physical weight pressing down on Gables's shoulders. Mr. Gables? Karim finally spoke, his voice dangerously devoid of inflection. You mentioned that Mrs. Vanderhoven reported the bracelet missing. Yes. Moments ago, Gables lied effortlessly. She was quite distraught. And you also mentioned that the security cameras in this establishment are state-of-the-art. The best money can buy, Gables boasted. 4K resolution motion tracking covering every inch of the floor. That is how we ensure the safety of guests like yourself. Excellent, Karim said. He turned to the young man in the suit, the assistant who had been typing on the tablet all night. Arthur, would you please show Mr. Gables the live feed? Gables frowned. The live feed. Why, Arthur, the assistant, didn't speak. He simply turned the large tablet around and placed it in the center of the table. On the screen was a crisp, high-definition video. It wasn't a live feed, but a playback. The timestamp showed it was from 20 minutes ago. Gables froze. His glass of wine hovered halfway to his mouth. The video showed the service corridor near the kitchen. It showed Samara walking out with a heavy tray, her back turned. And then it showed Robert Gables stepping out of the shadows. In the video, Gables wasn't checking for dust. He looked around furtively, checking to see if he was observed. He reached into his own jacket pocket and pulled out a glittering object, the diamond bracelet. As Samara passed him, he feigned a stumble, bumping into her hip. With the skill of a pickpocket, his hand slipped into her apron pocket and deposited the jewelry. Gables watched the screen, his face draining of all color. He looked like a wax figure melting under heat. Technology is a double-edged sword, Robert Karim said softly. It protects the innocent, but it also exposes the guilty. That's not Gable, stammered his voice cracking. That's doctored. It's AI. You're trying to trick me. It is the raw footage from your own server, Arthur said, speaking for the first time. His voice was British and clipped. I took the liberty of accessing your network when you insulted the Sheikh. Your firewall is as weak as your character. The uncle, who had been silent, leaned forward. He pointed a gnarled finger at the screen. Ali Bablu Kasir. The uncle rasped the rope of a lie is short. You set her up. Karim said, his voice rising in volume, the anger finally breaking through his calm facade. You took an innocent woman, a woman who works herself to the bone to care for a dying father, and you tried to destroy her life. And for what? To save your ego? To impress us, I did it for you, Gable screamed, standing up and knocking his chair over. The facade was gone now. Only the cornered rat remained. She was an embarrassment, a stain. She spoke to you without permission. I was trying to show you that I run a tight ship. You run nothing, Karim snapped. At that moment, the flashing blue lights of police cruisers washed over the front windows of the restaurant. The sirens cut through the rain. Gables smiled. A manic, desperate look. The police. I called them. They, clear his throat, are here for her. You can't stop this. It's her word against mine. And I am the general manager of the Obsidian Room. Who are they going to believe, a billionaire foreigner and a waitress or a pillar of the community? The front doors burst open. 3 NYPD officers marched in, shaking the rain from their uniforms. We got a call about a grand lesson, the lead officer announced, scanning the room. Gables stepped forward, straightening his tie, attempting to regain his composure. Officers, thank God you're here. The suspect is in the back. My security has her detained. She stole a diamond bracelet worth $50,000. The lead officer looked at Gables, then looked past him to the table. He paused. He squinted. Then his eyes widened. Sheikh lied? The officer asked, surprised. Karim stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. Officer, I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding the identity of the criminal. Gables looked between them, confused. What, you know him? The Sheikh's Foundation donated the new tactical gear for our precinct last year. The officer said, ignoring Gables. It's an honor, sir. The honor is mine, Karim said. Officer, I would like to file a formal complaint. I have video evidence of a man planting evidence to frame an employee filing a false police report and attempted extortion. Karim pointed a steady finger at Robert Gables. Arrest him. The 10 minutes that Samara spent inside the restaurant security office felt less like a span of time and more like a descent into a nightmare. The room was a windowless box of grey cinder block and humming electronics smelling faintly of stale coffee and ozone. Samara sat on a cold metal folding chair, her face buried in her hands. her body rocking slightly back and forth. She wasn't crying anymore. She was past the point of tears. She was in a state of cold, paralyzing dread. Her mind raced through the catastrophe of her reality. A criminal record meant she would never work in hospitality again. No job meant no income. No income meant the care facility in Queens would evict her father within the week. She could see Thomas's confused face as strangers packed his few belongings into garbage bags. She could hear him asking for her, his voice trembling in the dark. "I failed him." Clear's throat. She thought a suffocating weight pressing on her chest. "I tried to be honorable, and it cost us everything." Suddenly, the heavy steel door clicked and swung open. Samara flinched, her muscles locking up as she prepared for the sight of handcuffs. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the rough hands of the police for the reading of her rights. "Miss Mills." The voice wasn't aggressive, it was shaky. Samara opened her eyes. The security guard who had dragged her in here, a burly man named Miller, was standing in the doorway. He looked pale, his eyes wide, with a mixture of fear and deference. You're free to go, Miss Mills." Miller stammered, stepping aside and holding the door open. Samara stared at him, unable to process the words. "Go." "But the police? They're here for me." "No, Mom." Miller swallowed hard. "They're definitely not here for you. Please come with me." Samara stood up on trembling legs. She walked out of the office and into the kitchen, expecting the usual cacophony of shouting chefs and clanging pans. Instead, the kitchen was a tomb. The entire brigade led by Chef Gordon stood frozen at their stations. The sauté pans were sizzling unattended on the burners. As Samara walked through the aisle, the staff parted like the Red Sea. They didn't look at her with the usual disdain or indifference. They looked at her with awe, and in Chef Gordon's case, terrified guilt. He wouldn't meet her eyes, focusing intently on a spot on the floor, wiping his hands nervously on a rag. Miller pushed open the swinging doors to the dining room, and the scene that greeted Samara was so surreal she had to grab the door frame to steady herself. The romantic golden ambiance of the obsidian room had been shattered by the violent strobing wash of red and blue emergency lights through the floor to ceiling windows. The rain-slicked street was chaotic with police cruisers. But the real chaos was happening right in the center of the room. Robert Gables was not directing the police. He was being manhandled by them. Clear's throat. The general manager, usually a pillar of arrogant composure, was bent over the hood of a table, his expensive suit jacket bunched up as an officer ratcheted handcuffs onto his wrists. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury, mixed with the panic of a trapped animal. "This is a mistake," Gables screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "Do you know who I am? I run this city's dining scene. I am the Obsidian Room." Clear's throat. "You can't touch me. You have the right to remain silent." The officer droned, uninterested, pulling Gables upright. "And I suggest you use it. It's a setup." Gables shrieked, his eyes scanning the room wildly until they landed on Samara. "She did this. That waitress, she's a witch. She poisoned their minds. Get him out of here." The sergeant barked. Two officers dragged Gables toward the exit. He kicked and thrashed his dignity, stripping away with every step, leaving only a small, bitter man who had built his castle on sand. As the door slammed shut behind him, the silence rushed back into the room, heavier than before. Samara stood alone in the center of the parquet floor. Her apron still stained her hands, shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline crash hit her all at once. Her knees buckled. Samara. A steady hand caught her elbow before she could fall. She looked up. Sheikh Karim Al-Lid was there, his expression grave but kind. Beside him stood the uncle, no longer leaning heavily on his cane, but standing with the posture of a desert patriarch. I don't understand," Samara whispered, her voice barely audible. "How he had the bracelet. He had the proof. He had a lie," Karim corrected gently, guiding her to a chair. Not a servant stool, but one of the velvet dining chairs. Arthur, my assistant, accessed the internal server. "We saw the footage of him planting the jewelry in your pocket. We saw everything. You hacked the system." Samara asked, blinking through her tears. "We revealed the truth," the uncle said. His voice was raspy, but it carried a warmth that seemed to thaw the cold dread in Samara's bones. He stepped closer, reaching into the deep folds of his robe. He pulled out the small, worn leather pouch. With slow, deliberate movements, he took out a single date. "Eat," the uncle commanded softly. "Sugar is good for the shock and for the soul." Samara hesitated, then reached out with trembling fingers. She took the fruit. She took a small bite. The flavor exploded on her tongue, rich caramel, sweet and earthy. It wasn't just food. It was a sensory trigger. Instantly, she was back in Ammon, sitting on a rooftop with her father. The call to prayer echoing over the hills, feeling safe. Feeling home, she swallowed, and a fresh wave of tears fell. But these were tears of release. "Why?" she asked, looking between the two powerful men. "Why did you do this for me? I'm nobody. I'm just a waitress you met 2 hours ago." The uncle shook his head slowly. "You answered the riddle, my daughter. You proved that you are not nobody. You possess a heart of gold in a room filled with hearts of stone. That makes you a person of substance." Kareem reached into the breast pocket of his suit. He pulled out a checkbook and a fountain pen. He wrote something quickly, the scratch of the nib loud in the quiet room, and tore the slip of paper free. "Samara," Kareem said, his tone shifting from personal to professional. "I told you I was serious about the job offer, but I understand you have immediate concerns regarding your father." He slid the check across the white tablecloth. Samara looked at it. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The number written there wasn't just a salary. It was a fortune. It was enough to cover her father's care in the best private neurological facility in New York for 5 years. It was enough to pay off every debt she had. It was freedom. Clear's throat. I can't accept this," she stammered, pulling her hand back as if the paper were hot. "This is too much. I haven't done anything to earn this." "It is not a gift," Kareem said firmly, leaving the check on the table. "It is a signing bonus. The Alpha Foundation is establishing its North American headquarters here. We are not just buying this building. We are buying the entire block." He gestured around the room. "I fired the management tonight. All of it. I need a director of cultural relations who understands that hospitality is not about servitude, but about dignity. I need someone who speaks the language of the heart. I need you." Samara looked at the check, then at the uncle. The old man's eyes were twinkling. "Tawakkali Allah, Allah," he whispered. "Trust in God." Samara looked around the room. She saw the other waiters, the ones who had ignored her or mocked her, now looking at her with respect and hope. They were terrified of what would happen next. But in Samara, they saw a lifeline. She thought of her father. She thought of walking into his stark room at the state facility tomorrow morning. She imagined telling him, "Pack your bags, Baba. We're going to a place with a garden, a place where they will listen to your stories." She stood up. She wiped the last tear from her cheek and smoothed her apron. She wasn't the invisible waitress anymore. "I accept," Samara said, her voice clear and strong, but on one condition. Kareem raised an eyebrow, a hint, Clear's throat, of a smile playing on his lips. "You are in a position to negotiate." "Very well. Name it." Samara looked toward the kitchen where Chef Gordon was peeking through the porthole window. "We changed the menu." Samara said, "No more microscopic portions of food that leaves the soul hungry. No more intimidation. We serve real food. We serve food that welcomes people, not food that judges them." The uncle threw his head back and laughed. A loud, booming, joyous sound that filled the cavernous room and chased away the last lingering shadows of Robert Gables. "A true answer," the uncle cried, slapping his cane on the floor. "Deal," Karim said, extending his hand. Samara took it. His grip was warm and firm. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The storm had broken, leaving the air clean and crisp. The city lights of New York shimmered against the wet pavement like scattered diamonds. But Samara knew the truth now. The real gold wasn't in the lights or the jewelry or the bank accounts of the billionaires. It was in the decision to stand up when it would be easier to stay seated. It was in the courage to speak the truth when silence was safe. The story of Samara and the sheikh went viral not because of the wealth involved, but because of the justice served. It reminded the world that while money can buy buildings, it cannot buy class, and it certainly cannot buy a good heart. Samara Mills went on to lead the Foundation's hospitality division for decades. Under her direction, the Obsidian Room was renamed the Open Hearth, becoming the most celebrated cultural hub in the city. Her father Thomas lived the rest of his days in comfort, sitting in a sunlit garden, listening to his daughter read to him in the lyrical Arabic he had taught her so long ago. As for Robert Gables, legend has it, he is managing a fast food drive-through somewhere off the turnpike in New Jersey. And every time he hears a customer ask for a date, he flinches. Did you enjoy this story of karma and justice? Stories like this remind us that being kind is the ultimate strength. If you want to see more stories where the underdog wins and the arrogant get what they deserve, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who needs a smile today, and subscribe with the notification bell on so you never miss a twist. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next